Let's talk about intensity for a minute because in today's dating and relationship culture, intensity gets confused with intimacy all the time. If someone texts you nonstop, wants to see you every day, talks about the future way too fast, and makes you feel like the center of their universe, we're told that's romance. We're told when you know, you know. We're told that passion looks like urgency. And if it feels good, exciting, overwhelming, and intoxicating, it must be love, right? But what if it's not? Well, welcome back to Hearts Wine from Heart's Distractions, the podcast where we sip on the truths nobody warned us about in love, the kind of truths that don't always feel good going down, but make a whole lot more sense once you sit with them. Today's episode is one I've been wanting to have for a long time because this keeps showing up in dating and long-term relationships and marriages and honestly, in therapy rooms more than people realize. We're talking about love bombing, y'all, and how to tell the difference between someone loving you deeply and someone overwhelming you emotionally, because those two can look very similar at first. See, love bombing doesn't usually walk in waving a red flag. It walks in with flowers, with compliments, with constant attention, with good morning and good night texts every single day. It feels affirming. It feels validating. It feels like finally being chosen, especially if you've ever felt overlooked, underappreciated, or emotionally starved in past relationships. And that's the tricky part because love bombing doesn't feel manipulative in the beginning. It feels magical. It feels like chemistry. It feels like, wow, this person really sees me. But over time, that same intensity can start to feel heavy, suffocating, confusing, like you're being pulled closer instead of choosing closeness. In this episode, we're going to slow it all the way down. We're going to talk about what love bombing actually is and what it is not. We're going to unpack the difference between genuine love, compassion, affection, emotional intimacy, and manipulative intensity. We're going to talk about why so many of us mistake emotional flooding for emotional connection and how generational patterns, trauma, attachment styles, and even social media have normalized relationships that move fast but lack emotional safety. And let me be clear, y'all. This isn't about shaming anyone, not the person doing the love bombing, not the person receiving it. Many people don't even realize they're in this dynamic until the anxiety kicks in, the confusion starts, or the relationship suddenly feels very different than it did in the beginning. So, if you've ever asked yourself, is this love or is this too much? Why did something that felt so good start to feel so draining? And why do I feel guilty for wanting space in a relationship that's supposed to feel loving? You're not crazy and you're not alone. So I want y'all to pour yourself a glass, get comfortable, and stay with me for this conversation because sometimes the most loving thing we can do is learn the difference between intensity and intimacy. Let's start by clearing something up because the term love bombing gets thrown around so loosely online that it's starting to lose its meaning. Someone liking you a lot is not actually love bombing. Someone being excited about you is not love bombing. Someone wanting to talk to you every day in the beginning, also not necessarily love bombing. Love bombing is about excess, imbalance, and speed. At its core, love bombing is a pattern where someone uses overwhelming affection, attention, communication, and emotional intensity to fast track closeness before real trust has had time to grow. It's not just about what they're doing, it's about how quickly it's happening and how little space there is for you to breathe, question, or move at your own pace. Love bombing sounds like deep emotional connection, but it skips the foundation. It jumps straight to intensity without allowing time for consistency, boundaries, or emotional safety to develop. And here's where it gets confusing. Because on the surface, love bombing looks a lot like romance. It looks like passion. It looks like effort. It even looks like someone who is all in. But the difference is this: healthy love builds gradually. Love bombing overwhelms suddenly. Healthy affection grows with shared experiences, mutual curiosity, and emotional attunement. Love bombing rushes intimacy before you've even had the chance to see how someone handles disappointment, boundaries, conflict, or even the word no. And let's be honest, most people don't recognize love bombing right away because it doesn't feel bad in the beginning. It feels amazing. It feels like finally being appreciated. It feels like someone sees your worth without you having to explain it. But love bombing often includes things like constant texting or calling that feels flattering at first until it starts to feel expected. Big emotional declarations very early that sound like, "I've never felt this way. You're my soulmate." And my favorite, "You're different from anyone I've ever met," before real life has had a chance to show up. An urgency around closeness that doesn't leave room for you to move slowly or independently. And the key thing to notice is this: love bombing focuses on access, not understanding. The goal isn't to know you deeply over time, it's to feel close as fast as possible. That's why love bombing often creates confusion. You might find yourself thinking, "I should be happy. This is what everyone says they want, right?" And yet, something feels off. You feel pressure to keep up with the pace. You feel guilty when you need space. You feel anxious instead of secure. Because real love doesn't demand closeness, it invites it. Love bombing says, "Let's merge right now," where healthy love says, "Let's grow together." And that distinction matters because when intensity replaces intimacy, the relationship becomes more about emotional stimulation than emotional connection. Recognizing love bombing is that it often looks like what we've been taught love is supposed to look like. Movies, music, social media, all of it tells us that love should be all consuming. That if someone isn't obsessed with you, they don't care enough. So when someone comes in hot, full attention, full emotion, full focus, we label it real love without ever asking whether it's healthy love. True love and manipulative intensity can feel almost identical at first. The difference shows up over time, and especially when real life starts happening. True love is consistent. It doesn't spike and disappear. It doesn't feel amazing one week and emotionally confusing the next. True love grows through reliability, not emotional fireworks. It shows up even when the moment isn't romantic, when the conversation is uncomfortable, and when boundaries are set. Manipulative intensity, on the other hand, thrives on emotional highs. It feels exciting, urgent, and consuming, but it's fragile. The moment you slow the pace, ask for space, or assert independence, the energy shifts. The affection may pull back, the warmth may cool, and suddenly you're left wondering what you did wrong. That's one of the clearest differences. True love respects boundaries. Manipulative intensity challenges them. In healthy relationships, boundaries don't threaten connection, they protect it. You can say, I need a night to myself, and it doesn't turn into guilt, distance, or emotional punishment. With love bombing, boundaries often feel like rejection. Even reasonable limits are met with disappointment, withdrawal, or subtle pressure to comply. And here's another important distinction. True love creates safety. Manipulative intensity creates urgency. When love is real, you don't feel rushed to prove anything. You don't feel like you're constantly auditioning for affection. You're allowed to be human, to be tired, busy, imperfect, without fearing that the connection will disappear. But with manipulative intensity, there's often an unspoken message: stay close or else. The closeness feels conditional, the affection feels earned, and the relationship starts to feel like emotional maintenance instead of emotional ease. Many people describe this shift as emotional whiplash. One moment you're adored, the next you're confused. And confusion is a red flag, not because love should be boring, but because love should be clear. Real love doesn't keep you guessing where you stand. It doesn't make you feel anxious about taking up space. And it definitely doesn't make you feel guilty for being your own person. If intensity feels like pressure instead of peace, it's worth paying attention. Now, let's talk about the part people don't like to admit out loud. Love bombing feels incredible in the beginning. And if we don't understand why it feels so good, it becomes really easy to shame ourselves for falling into it or staying longer than we should. This isn't about weakness. This is about biology, attachment, and unmet emotional needs colliding at the same time. When someone showers you with attention, affirmation, and affection, your brain releases dopamine, the same chemical associated with pleasure, reward, and motivation. Dopamine doesn't care if something is healthy. It only cares that it feels good. Add oxytocin, the bonding hormone, and suddenly your body is attaching faster than your logic can keep up. According to attachment research, often referenced in marriage and family therapy, people with anxious attachment styles or unresolved relational trauma are especially vulnerable to intense emotional connection early on. If you ever had to work hard to be seen, chosen, or valued in past relationships, or even in childhood, love bombing can feel like relief, like finally exhaling. No, we are not Angela Bassett here, people. And just so you know, it feels more like I don't have to chase this person. It feels like I don't have to explain my worth. It feels like this is what I've been waiting for. And that's why love bombing is so seductive. It meets emotional needs quickly without requiring emotional work. It creates closeness without trust. It creates attachment without history. And for a while, that feels magical. There's also the chosen effect. Being intensely desired can feel like validation, especially in a dating culture where so many people feel disposable. Love bombing says, you're special, you're different, you're not like the others. And if we're honest, most of us want to feel that way. But here's where it becomes dangerous. When intensity becomes the source of security instead of consistency, when the relationship starts feeling good because of emotional highs instead of emotional stability, you're not bonding, you're riding a wave. And guess what? Waves crash. Over time, many people notice that the same intensity that once felt intoxicating starts to feel exhausting. The constant communication becomes pressure, the constant closeness becomes suffocating, the emotional highs are followed by emotional drops. And you find yourself working harder to get back to the version of the relationship that existed in the beginning. That's not love deepening, people. That's attachment anxiety forming. Love that's real doesn't rely on adrenaline to survive. It relies on safety, trust, and mutual emotional regulation. If the connection only feels strong when everything is intense, that's a sign to slow down and ask what's really holding the relationship together. Okay, this is where things usually start to click for people because love bombing makes the most sense when you see it play out in real relationships, not just definitions. So let me walk you through a few scenarios that might sound a little familiar. Let's start with dating, shall we? We're going to call this couple Monique and Darren. Monique met Darren and immediately felt swept off her feet. He texted her constantly, called her every night, sent flowers to her job within the first month, and talked about their future like it was already decided. He told her he'd never felt this connected to anyone before. And at first, Monique felt chosen, desired, secure. After years of emotionally unavailable partners, this felt like a breath of fresh air, people. But slowly, the tone shifted. When Monique didn't respond quickly, Darren asked if something was wrong. When she wanted a night to herself, he got quiet. When she made plans with friends, he'd say things like, "I just miss you." But in a way, that felt heavy, like she was disappointing him for having a life outside of the relationship. The affection didn't disappear, it just came with strings. Now, let's talk about a long-term relationship, shall we? Because yes, this also happens in those as well. And I'm going to use this couple, we going to call them Andre and Lewis. So Andre and Lewis had been together for years. Early in their relationship, Andre was incredibly attentive, always checking in, always wanted to be close, always emotionally present. Over time, though, that closeness became control. Andre struggled when Lewis wanted independence. Emotional distance, even healthy distance, felt threatening. If Lewis focused on work or personal growth, Andre interpreted it as abandonment. What started as deep connection slowly turned into emotional monitoring. And this is the part people don't talk about enough. Love bombing doesn't always start loud. Sometimes it starts soft. Sometimes it starts as care that gradually becomes control, closeness that slowly becomes constraint. Here's what all these stories have in common. The relationship became less about mutual connection and more about managing someone else's emotional comfort. That's when love bombing crosses the line. Healthy relationships allow both people to expand. Love bombing contracts the relationship around one person's emotional needs. One partner starts adjusting, shrinking, accommodating, or over-explaining just to keep the peace. And that's usually when people will say things like, "I don't feel like myself anymore. I feel guilty for wanting space. And I don't know why I'm exhausted, but I am." Those aren't signs of love deepening. Those are signs of emotional imbalance. Love should make room for both people, not require one person to disappear in order for the relationship to feel secure. And if the intensity only works when you're constantly available, constantly reassuring, constantly choosing the relationship over yourself, it's time to pause and ask, What's really being built here? This is usually the moment in the episode where people get real quiet because I know some of y'all sitting back thinking about all the things I just shared already, and y'all are quiet. Like you can hear a pin drop in the room. Because once you hear these red flags out loud, it's hard to unsee them. And the truth is, most people don't ignore red flags because they're careless. They ignore them because the green flags feel so good in the beginning that the red ones get reframed, minimized, or romanticized. One of the biggest red flags is moving too fast emotionally, not physically, emotionally. When someone wants deep commitment, constant reassurance, or future planning before you've had time to see how they handle conflict, disappointment, or boundaries, that's not intimacy. That's acceleration. Healthy relationships don't rush past the getting to know you phase because that phase is where emotional safety is built. Another red flag is constant communication that doesn't allow space. At first, it feels flattering. Good morning texts, checking in throughout the day, long phone calls every night. But pay attention to what happens when you don't engage at the same level. Do they respect your pace or do they question it? Do they give you room or do you feel pressure to respond so they don't feel insecure? When affection turns into obligation, something is off. Then there's emotional closeness that quietly isolates you. Love bombing often pulls people inward so intensely that outside relationships start to fade. Not because you're told to cut people off, but because it feels easier to stay close to the relationship than risk emotional fallout. Friends, family, and personal interests slowly take a back seat, and suddenly your world starts revolving around one person. All right, I'm going to keep going because I'm going to give y'all two more. Because another overlooked red flag is emotional whiplash. Yep, I said it. Intense affection followed by withdrawal, silence, or mood shifts when you assert independence. This creates confusion, and confusion keeps people stuck. According to relationship research, emotional inconsistency increases anxiety and attachment, making it harder to step back even when something doesn't feel right. And finally, one of the most ignored red flags is guilt disguised as love. Statements like, "I just miss you. I thought we were closer than that." Or, "I just care more than you do," may sound emotional, but they subtly place responsibility on you to manage someone else's feelings. Love doesn't require you to shrink. Love doesn't punish you for having boundaries. Love doesn't make you feel anxious for being human. If you constantly feel like you're walking on emotional eggshells just to maintain connection, it's not passion. Guess what it is? It's pressure, people. And pressure has no place in healthy love. Noticing these red flags doesn't mean you failed. It means you're becoming aware. And awareness is always the first step toward choosing something healthier for yourself. One of the reasons love bombing is so hard to recognize is because many of us were raised in environments where emotional chaos was normalized as love. If you grew up watching relationships filled with dramatic highs and lows, inconsistent affection, or emotional volatility, intensity doesn't feel alarming. It feels familiar. For a lot of people, especially in marginalized communities, love was taught through survival, not safety. Struggle love, ride or die love, love that proves itself through sacrifice, endurance, and emotional pain. So when someone comes in intense, expressive, and consuming, it doesn't feel like a red flag. It feels like commitment. There's also a generational message that says love should be hard. If it isn't intense, dramatic, or all consuming, it must be boring or lacking passion. Older generations often equated emotional endurance with loyalty, while younger generations, influenced by social media, equate constant attention with emotional availability. And let's talk about social media for a moment, can we? Because it has absolutely reshaped how love is performed. We see grand gestures, nonstop couple content, public declarations of love, and relationships moving at lightning speed online. Rarely do we see pacing, boundaries, or emotional regulation trending. So when real life doesn't match the highlight reel, people overcompensate with intensity instead of building intimacy. I said it, y'all. Cultural expectations around gender also play a role. Many men were taught that emotional intensity is how you prove love, while many women were taught that being desired intensely equals worth. In LGBTQ plus relationships, love bombing can sometimes be mistaken for emotional safety, especially for people who didn't experience affirmation growing up and are craving deep connection. When you put all of this together, family patterns, cultural norms, social media, and unhealed attachment, it makes sense why love bombing feels normal because it's familiar. It mirrors what many of us saw modeled as love, even when those models weren't healthy. But familiarity doesn't equal health. Part of breaking generational cycles is learning to redefine what love looks like. Love doesn't have to be loud to be real. It doesn't have to rush to be committed. And it doesn't have to hurt to be meaningful. Sometimes the healthiest love feels calm. And for people used to chaos, calm can feel uncomfortable at first. I'm going to keep going for y'all. So hopefully y'all are listening because I am dropping some gems tonight on y'all. And guess what? This is usually the turning point. The moment when people start asking themselves, what happened to us? The energy shifts, the intensity fades, the affection changes, and suddenly the relationship doesn't feel the way it did in the beginning. When love bombing stops, it rarely stops gently. Texts become less frequent, compliments slow down, emotional warmth gets replaced with distance, irritation, or silence. And the most confusing part is that nothing obvious has happened. There wasn't a big argument, there wasn't betrayal, there wasn't a clear reason for the shift, which leaves you searching for answers and often blaming yourself. This is where emotional withdrawal becomes a form of control. The same person who once flooded you with attention now withholds it. And because the relationship was built on intensity instead of stability, the absence feels alarming. You start working harder, checking in more, accommodating more, over explaining more, just to get back to the version of the relationship that felt good. Well, according to marriage and family therapy research, inconsistent reinforcement, such as affection followed by withdrawal, strengthens emotional attachment, not weakens it. The unpredictability keeps people emotionally hooked, constantly trying to fix what they believe they broke. And here's the quiet damage. You start questioning yourself. You wonder if you're asking for too much. You wonder if you're being difficult. And you wonder if needing space was a mistake. That confusion keeps people stuck longer than anger ever would. Instead of asking, why did their behavior change? Many people start asking, what's wrong with me? And that's when love bombing shifts from something that felt intoxicating into something that feels emotionally destabilizing. Healthy love doesn't disappear when things slow down. It doesn't punish you for asserting independence, and it doesn't leave you confused about where you stand. If affection only flows when you comply, reassure, or stay small, that's not love deepening. That's emotional conditioning. And recognizing that moment is often the first step toward reclaiming your clarity and your power. Y'all, a lot of people think love bombing is only a dating stage issue, but that's not true. Love bombing doesn't always end a relationship. Sometimes it evolves inside it, especially in long term partnerships and marriages where the intensity from the beginning was never replaced with emotional stability. Long term relationships, love bombing often shows up as a cycle. Periods of intense affection are followed by emotional withdrawal, conflict, or distance, then followed again by grand gestures meant to reset the relationship without actually addressing what's broken. This creates a loop where passion becomes a substitute for repair. Over time, one partner usually becomes the emotional regulator, constantly adjusting their behavior to maintain peace. They learn what triggers withdrawal and what brings affection back. And slowly, the relationship becomes less about mutual connection and more about emotional management. Well, marriage and family therapy research shows that relationships built on emotional intensity without secure attachment often experience higher levels of anxiety, burnout, and resentment over time. Why? Because intensity is not sustainable. It requires constant emotional output without the grounding of trust, predictability, and safety. In marriages, this can look like big romantic gestures after hurtful behavior without accountability, affection that increases when the relationship feels threatened, and emotional closeness that fades once security is reestablished. Instead of addressing conflict directly, love bombing becomes a way to avoid vulnerability and responsibility. The relationship stays emotionally loud, but emotionally shallow. And here's the cost. Intimacy suffers. I said it, and I'm going to let that sit right there. Because true intimacy requires safety. It requires honesty. It requires the ability to disagree, grow, and exist as individuals without fear of emotional consequences. When love bombing is present, intimacy gets replaced by performance. One partner performs closeness, the other performs compliance. Eventually, many people in these relationships say things like, I feel emotionally tired all the time. I don't know what version of my partner I'm getting. And I miss feeling secure instead of on edge. Love isn't supposed to feel like emotional labor. It's supposed to feel like partnership. When intensity is used to avoid emotional depth, the relationship may look passionate from the outside, but inside it's often fragile. And fragility isn't the same as closeness. So now that we've named it, unpacked it, and told the truth about how love bombing shows up, let's talk about what actually helps. Because awareness without tools just leaves people anxious and stuck. The goal isn't to shame intensity, it's to redirect it into something healthy and sustainable. So, the first solution is slowing down without shutting down. I hope y'all caught that. Healthy love doesn't mean lack of excitement, it means pacing. Slowing down allows consistency to reveal itself. Anyone can be intense for a short period of time. Not everyone can be emotionally regulated, respectful, and present over time. When a relationship is healthy, slowing the pace doesn't threaten the connection, it strengthens it. If someone reacts negatively when you ask to move slower, that reaction is information. Another key solution is clear, compassionate boundaries. Boundaries are not walls, they're instructions. Saying, I need space to recharge, or I move more slowly emotionally, isn't projection. It's self-awareness. In secure relationships, boundaries are met with curiosity and respect, not guilt or punishment. If affection disappears when boundaries appear, the affection was conditional. It's also important to build emotional intimacy through experiences, not intensity. True connection grows through shared values, conflict resolution, honesty, and mutual growth, not just through constant communication or big gestures. Ask questions that go deeper than chemistry. Pay attention to how your partner handles disappointment, accountability, and stress. Those moments reveal far more than romantic words ever could or will. For couples already in a relationship where love bombing has occurred, repair is possible, but it requires accountability. The partner who love bombs must be willing to examine their attachment patterns, fear of abandonment, or need for control. This often means therapy, relationship coaching, self-reflection, and learning emotional regulation skills. Love doesn't improve by doubling down on intensity. It improves by increasing emotional safety. And for the partner who received the love bombing, healing often involves rebuilding trust with yourself. Learning to listen to your body when something feels off. Learning that discomfort doesn't mean disconnection. Learning that you don't have to earn love by overextending yourself. Healthy love feels steady. It feels mutual. It feels calm enough to breathe in. And if you've never experienced that before, it can feel unfamiliar. But unfamiliar doesn't mean wrong. Sometimes the most loving relationships don't start with fireworks. They start with peace. This is the part of the episode where I want you to pause. Not to judge your relationship, not to panic, and definitely not to spiral, but to get honest with yourself. Because clarity doesn't come from overanalyzing your partner's behavior. It comes from tuning into your own emotional experience inside the relationship. Here's the first question I want you to ask yourself. Do I feel calm, or do I feel anxious when I think about this relationship? Healthy love may feel exciting, but underneath that excitement is emotional steadiness. If your nervous system constantly feels on edge, waiting for texts, worried about tone changes, afraid to disappoint, that's not chemistry. That's anxiety. Another important question I want y'all to ask yourselves is, am I allowed to have space without consequences? Well, can you say no, take time for yourself, or prioritize other relationships without emotional backlash? Or does independence lead to distance, guilt, or withdrawal? Real love doesn't punish you for being whole. And I want you to ask yourself this too. Do I feel chosen, or do I feel responsible? There's a big difference between feeling loved and feeling like you're managing someone else's emotions. If you're constantly reassuring, fixing, adjusting, or explaining just to keep the peace, the relationship may be relying on your emotional labor instead of mutual regulation. And here's one that hits deep for a lot of people. If the intensity disappeared tomorrow, would there still be trust? Would there still be respect, communication, shared values, and emotional safety? Or has the connection been held together mainly by passion, attention, and urgency? Lastly, I want y'all to ask yourselves, am I becoming more myself or less? Healthy relationships expand you. They don't shrink you. You should feel more confident, more grounded, more connected to who you are, not like you're slowly disappearing to keep love intact. Y'all, these questions aren't meant to scare you. They're meant to ground you. Because love that feels real, that is real, doesn't need to be chased, managed, or constantly proven. It shows up steadily. It allows you to breathe, and it leaves you feeling clearer, not confused. And if nothing else, remember this: love should feel safe enough to slow down. Here's what I want you to take with you as we close this conversation. Love is not supposed to leave you confused about where you stand. It's not supposed to feel like emotional whiplash. And it's not supposed to require you to shrink, overextend, or silence your needs just to keep the connection alive. Intensity can be beautiful, but only when it's grounded in emotional safety. Without that foundation, intensity becomes noise. It becomes pressure. It becomes chaos dressed up as passion. True love doesn't rush you. It doesn't overwhelm you. And it doesn't disappear when things slow down. Real love grows. It steadies. It holds pace. And it allows both people to be fully themselves without fear that independence will cost them connection. If this episode helped you name something you've been feeling but couldn't quite explain, let that be your starting point. Awareness is powerful, and choosing healthier love doesn't mean you're asking for too much. And it means you're finally asking for what actually lasts. So, if you've enjoyed this episode today, I want you to go ahead and subscribe to my YouTube channel, Hearts Wine from Hearts Distractions on YouTube. I want you to go check out my website, www.aliciasdistractions.com. I want you to go ahead and definitely check out my poetry book on Amazon, Distractions of the Heart. And lastly, if you aren't following me already on social media, you can check out my pages on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. Thank you for sipping on this truth with me today. And until next time, protect your heart, honor your peace, choose love that feels like peace, and stop letting these partners love bomb you. Cheers.